Hello, storytellers and story hearers. I don't know if that's how you see yourself, but that's how I see us, so I don't know. Think about that. Think about what that means to you. Anyway, welcome. I'm so glad you've chosen to spend some time in conversation with me and Madison today. Whatever the reason that made you choose this episode, I'm hopeful that you can find some value in it. As always, I'm Abbie. This is Stories Lived, Stories Told, and here's what I know. Our communication is the core of everything we create in our world. Because communicating happens in everything we do, in everything we say, in how we spend our time, how we spend our money, the people we surround ourselves with, it's worth looking at and talking about. So what do we want to be communicating? And what do we want our communication to create? Today we have part 2 of our conversation with Madison Gonzalez. She is a poet, which is what we talked about in part 1 of our conversation, which you can go back and listen to at any time. And she is also the executive director of a nonprofit that provides hospice care to individuals with nowhere else to go. That's what we're talking about today. In this conversation, we're going to get to take a peek into this world that Madison works in and talk a little bit about why death and dying is so hard to talk about. So, taking our question in the context of this conversation, I'd be asking, what do we want to create in the ways we communicate about death and dying? And how can we look at the way we approach death and dying now and try to make different choices? So keep those questions in mind as we step into this conversation. When we last left off in part 1, Madison and I had been talking about the new kind of story she hopes to write for herself and for her children about what is possible and what can be true for them. Today we're continuing this conversation about the new kinds of stories we want to tell, specifically in Madison's work with those in hospice care. It's a heavy topic, but I invite you to lean into it with us today. So let's begin. Okay, so moving on to talk about your work, tell us more about Morning Light.
I would love to. Morning Light is one of just a handful of houses, truly homes, in the entire country. We are located in Indianapolis, and we are a 12-bedroom facility. And at 12 beds, it puts us at the biggest home in the whole country like this. But we take care of and provide shelter for and a home for individuals who are dying. It's a heavy subject. And, to talk about death and dying is a taboo subject out here in the West. In good old USA, we don't talk about that. We put death in a box a lot. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but one that needs to be had because it's universal.
Yeah.
So when somebody is put on hospice, and hospice is 6 months or less to live, and they don't have an address to claim that benefit, we provide that address. And so it's called the Abbie Hunt Bryce Home. So good name, good strong name, Abbie. Yeah, it's called the Abbie Hunt Bryce Home. And we have served over 800 people at the end of their life. And they come and they have a warm bed and they have 24/7 care. They get 3 home-cooked meals a day and just are validated as human beings before they pass away, because it's really our mission that everybody deserves dignity at the end of life. And I don't really care what you did. I don't really care what you look like. I don't care where you came from. When it comes time for you to, take that journey into the beyond, we just don't want anyone to do that alone. And so beyond basic needs, we're really about helping people feel seen and heard and valued in their final days. And that ties very much into story for me, because it was pretty quick when I started working there that I thought, we need to be capturing these people's stories. They have incredible stories and also can really bust some stupid taboos about homeless populations and individuals who might find themselves, in that situation. Because there's so many different ways that society can kind of fail a human being. And a lot of it starts early in childhood, right? But a lot of it is different. Everyone's story looks different for why, they came to be where they are. And I find their stories very powerful because I find them stories of resilience.
Yeah.
Very resilient people willing and open, to share what they've seen and what they've experienced in hopes that through that they can shed some light on some issues. And so I think Abbie is unique because it captures a lot of individuals who were failed differently by the system.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can start to have conversations about that and how do we avoid that in the future and help people not be in a position where they're terminally ill without anywhere to go and without anyone to help them. We always have a waiting list, at 12 rooms, we always have a waiting list. And like I said, we're the biggest one in the country. They come and they stay with us for absolutely no cost to them. We don't charge insurance. We are a nonprofit. And so we fundraise through the community. We have special events, seek out grants and that kind of thing. But we run completely on community support. And so it's a very unique mission, very unique operation, something I didn't ever realize I would be doing. When I started at Morning Light, I didn't even know what hospice really was. But I do think that speaks to the power of story, because I pretty quickly caught on to why it was important and needed, and really just a beautiful gift to someone.
Like you're saying, the obvious way that stories are a part of this is in you collecting almost the stories of the people that come stay at this home.
Yes.
I think the other way that stories play into this is that you're actually telling these people that get to come stay at the home, you're telling them a new story, because the story they've heard their whole life is, you don't really matter. We don't really care what happens to you. There's no support system for you here. You are different for whatever reason. You are discounted. People are going to look the other way. People aren't going to show up for you. That is the story that probably a lot of these people have heard their whole lives. And so you're telling them a new story. I think that's incredibly powerful.
Thank you. You said that perfectly. Can I have that on a clip?
Yeah. I'll write that down.
You really did. You nailed it. Yeah. I mean, that's the goal, right? Is to hold space for them and give them a different story before they pass away. And for many, like you said, for many of the residents that have come to Abbie, it is the first time that anyone's ever told them that we care, or that we're here for you, or that you matter. Sometimes people cannot even believe they're going to have a bed. They cannot even believe they're going to be able to count on food, and those are just basic needs. Once you get those needs met, and you can go to the next level and tell them, not only are we going to feed you, but we're going to love you too. It's a lot. It's a lot for them. And, when you talk to a lot of the residents and you ask them what they're afraid of, it's not dying, it's being forgotten. And so I also have, a mad passion for legacy. I think stories can create legacy, and it's important to look back on legacy, because you can see where we're coming from and see where we're going, and you give people a chance to live beyond themselves. And that's what stories can do. By capturing those stories, they know that they won't be forgotten. They know that their message or their experience, their perspective or their opinions, I mentioned Richard earlier. Richard, his very final entry of his book was, too many of us leave this world with our stories untold. And I have that framed because it's so true, because there's so much to learn from every single person. There's so much to learn from everyone.
That's kind of cool for you to have that as like a guiding light.
Yeah, it was really the catalyst for me. When I read that, I was like, you're darn right. I don't want to leave my world, this world without my story untold. And, that was back in 2018, and I'm still telling his story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
he'd be happy about that.
I think that's one of the powerful things about stories too, is they have this power to live beyond you.
How do you go about collecting the stories of the residents right now? Is that more like on a personal level as you interact with them, you're getting to hear their stories, or do you have any way that you're kind of, bringing them all together so that other people can hear their stories as well?
Yeah. So right now, when I'm collecting stories, it's more of me sat, bedside and, do you mind sharing a few things? And sometimes you don't even have to ask, sometimes people are extremely eager to share their story. And once they get going, there's no stopping them. And I think that's awesome. Other people, might take a little bit of opening up, but trying, as we move forward this year, to consider the other ways that people can leave their legacies too. So, like I said, right now it's really kind of me and my team sitting down and asking questions and capturing that and then sharing those, but trying to also get art therapists in, so that they can create artwork that can be left behind. And we have a company that we work with who actually did a fundraiser for us because they loved our mission, and they come in and they help our residents write songs and then record
Wow.
those songs that then they can give those songs to family or friends or to us to have, a song that they have written, encourage those journals, journaling. And also, I think, trying to facilitate any amends that need to be made, between family members so that the story that that person wished that family member knew about them can be heard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I think a lot of the time it's just a matter of communicating, it's a matter of having the openness and the willingness to listen to why something happened or why someone was the way they were, even if you didn't agree with that. But we're really trying to break down any barriers. We actually have a Russian speaking individual right now. He had come from a shelter and he had been living at a local shelter for, a decade, and then is on hospice. So of course we welcomed him at Abbie, but he couldn't talk to anyone, he couldn't say anything. And I'll say, in Indiana, Russian speaking individuals are not easy to come by, but it was just like kismet. I was talking to a friend and I was just sharing, sometimes we have these individuals that I can't communicate with, and that's really difficult because I don't want them to feel unheard. Mm-hmm. And she's like, oh, well, one of my good friends is, she speaks Russian and she's been wanting to volunteer at a hospice. And I was like, really?
Oh my God.
Yeah. The next day, this woman comes in and this, kind of gruff and angry man who, wouldn't say anything to us unless it was asking for a cup of coffee, is sharing his story. And we know, now that he's spent years working on boats and building boats and, he's got 2 kids and they've been estranged, but through her words and through her communication, because not only did she come that day, she's come every day since.
Wow.
To talk to him. That gentleman's son is coming to see him and, they haven't spoken in years. And it's through that communication, right? I mean, a language barrier was keeping him from being able to connect to another person who could then facilitate a connection with his son. I just think, I get chills. It's like, it's crazy. And that's the power of, communication. If you're talking about creation, right.
Yep.
And change and communicating and stories, it really did come down to words. It really did come down to language and being able to just communicate with somebody.
Yeah.
And now this man has been validated. He doesn't have to die feeling like no one cared enough to try to get to know me or hear what I had to say. And that's what we do. That's what we do at Morning Light.
What is it like for you or for the people you work with to get to know people, to start building relationships with people, knowing that they're so close to dying?
I think it takes a special person. I don't think it's for everybody. Everybody has their calling in life and hospice is not for everybody. It can be really hard. And, we have had individuals come to work at Abbie and think that they're going to be okay with it and realize that, no, this is too hard. I can't do this. And that's okay, but I think, for me, getting to know these individuals, it's about the life they have left. It's not about the fact that they're dying. And I think that that's something as a culture we need to do a lot better of is even if someone is terminal, even if, someone has a limited time, they still are alive and they still have life to live and they still have experiences to be had. And by pulling away or just saying like, yeah, no, I don't want to get too close to them because, I'm going to lose them soon. You're denying them of that life that they still have left. And so I guess for me, it's just trying to frame it in that way. And also it's comforting to know that even though they're going to pass away, we're making a difference. We're making a difference for them. And that's enough. I do have a story though. We had a woman named Penny. Let's see, this would have been 2021. And, as you can imagine, Penny had just had a horrific childhood and just lots of abuse and different things in her life. And that story kept repeating itself, into her adulthood, and just really no one had her back. And the system failed her from a child all the way up through. And she was very forthcoming with all of that, but she had a very positive spirit. She still had a smile. I don't know how. I mean, sometimes I'm like, I really don't know how people are smiling or still here today. Like, wow. But she was super positive and just really generous with her spirit, and had cooked a Thanksgiving, meal for all of the residents in the home. And our residents, find little ways to give back to each other, even though they're sick, even though they don't feel well, they still want to contribute. And I think that's important to recognize too. But she'd cooked a Thanksgiving meal, and every year we have Santa come to the home and do some rounds. And so the week of Christmas, Santa Claus, came to the house and he stopped in a Penny's room, and she just lit up. And she said, "This is the first time in my life I've ever met Santa Claus in person." Her, whole life, her whole childhood, like no one had ever taken her to see Santa.
Yeah.
And here she is, on hospice, but she's meeting Santa for the first time, and she's so excited, and she's asking him all these questions about his reindeer and getting a present and, all of these things. And she died 2 days later on Christmas Eve. And I just think that shows you the amount of life people can still live even up until their final moments.
Yeah.
And that it's so important not to just, oh, well, they're dying, so let's just kind of wrap it up. It's like, no, give them as many experiences and as much happiness and joy and validation and life, as you can until you can't anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think it's with that mentality that we get through, but it's hard, my staff experiences a lot of grief. Sometimes you make connections with that one person, that really gets to you when they go. And so trying on the back end to have, grief support opportunities and people they can talk to, or self-care, self-care is so important when you're caring for other people. We talk about that, burnout and whatnot. It's not for the faint of heart. And so you really do have to be making sure you're taking care of yourself so that you're not pouring from an empty cup, as they say.
Yeah, it makes sense that, that environment is not for everyone. But overall, I think we do ourselves a disservice to, always be looking away from death and those, big, scary things that are outside of our control a lot of times. Because, like, you kind of alluded to earlier, other cultures definitely do that better than us about how do we honor a person's life? How do we give them like dignity, and how do we celebrate their life when they die instead of just turning our heads the other way and saying it's too painful to look, because it is so painful.
Absolutely.
And like you're saying, you all experience that real grief every day, probably, in what you do, but that's not to say it's not something that we should keep leaning into.
Right. It's part of life, it's absolutely a part of life, and it's part of someone's story. It's the one common denominator we all have, it's going to happen to all of us. And, people lose others in varying degrees. And that's, of course, difficult and can be very triggering for people. But I will say that I think the more we can have these conversations, the less shocking, the less out of control it will feel. The more prepared you will feel. I lost my grandma in 2020. And if I hadn't been working at the Abbie Hunt Bryce Home, I wouldn't have handled it nearly as well as I did.
Yeah.
And I was able to go in there and hold her hand and, say I loved her and tell her she looked pretty and, just take care of her. Whereas I think, maybe if I hadn't had those experiences before, I wouldn't have known what to do. I would have felt kind of uncomfortable. I'm not saying it wasn't difficult.
Of course.
In fact, yesterday was the anniversary of her death.
Oh, wow.
And so yesterday was, a hard one for me. 3 years later, it's still hard.
Yep.
And grief doesn't go away. But it's a sign of love, right? And it's a sign of your humanity. And it's a sign of honoring someone else's humanity. And again, I don't know what's really more important than that. So
yeah.
Definitely things that I would love to see more conversations and maybe storytelling,
Absolutely.
Maybe some stories about that so that we know what to expect when that comes, when we come across that in our own life.
Yeah. With your perspective you have from this job and your experience you have, I just wonder if you have any, different insight onto why you think people are so afraid of conversations about death or talking about end of life or being in that end of life moment with other people.
Well, we're afraid of the unknown. I think, people are afraid of what they can't assign a name to or understand. And we don't know what happens next, right? We really don't. And so sometimes it's the mystery that's scary for people. I think pain and loss is scary for people. Sometimes it's easier to take control and say, no, I'm not going to do that. That's making a decision than putting your vulnerability on the line and just kind of being open. Vulnerability is hard for people. But I do also think culturally, it's not it's a taboo subject. And even if someone has lost someone, oh, do I say anything? Do I ask them about that person? I don't want to remind them of that pain. You're not reminding them of that pain. They have not forgotten.
Yeah.
It's isolating to feel like nobody wants to talk to you or bring these things up when they're the elephant in the room. They're the glaring thing that just happened. And also giving space for all of these like weird emotions that come up, like anger, like being mad at that person, for having the audacity to leave you,
Right.
That's real. Or just these weird things that we maybe haven't experienced yet and don't know that we're going to experience because it's not being talked about. And so it makes it that much more isolating. I think that death and dying and having lost someone is one of those silent things, in society. It's just one of those things we just don't bring up. We don't talk about it. And I do feel like when you give something a little more air, it can become a little less isolating and a little less painful. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's the unknown of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. The unknown, the out of controlness.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Not having
to
control
me.
Is very scary. It's very scary. But it is interesting. Like you said, in other cultures, multi-generational living is a lot more common, right? It's a lot more tribal. You take care of the kids and you take care of your elders. In the West, in the United States, it's like a badge of honor for everyone to have their own home, to be independent. And the kids are independent and the parents are independent and their parents are independent and we're all living isolated. I think it's good in a way that we're having more conversations about what that isolation looks like.
Yeah.
Because COVID, of course, really put a spotlight on what that looked like for the aging population and just how out of touch they were with their family. And, we can't go see them and they're in this kind of facility. And it was really painful, really hard for a lot of families. And so my hope is that, unfortunately, that pain maybe sparks more conversation about how we can start to unify families a little bit more, or friends or communities or whatever it looks like. But I do think, it just lends itself to kind of the glorification of being independent and isolated and not needing anyone else. A, and then B, our busyness culture. We don't have time. We don't have time to take care of each other. We don't have time. We have too many things to go out and do.
Yeah.
I don't have time to take care of, XYZ. So reevaluating what's important as well.
Yeah, I think it's horrible and at the same time glaringly obvious to say that the idea of nursing homes is, almost like a systemic manifestation of all the ideas you're saying that happen on a personal level, almost like a out of sight, out of mind. It's like collectively as a culture, we have said we are turning away from death. We're going to put it in this corner where only a few people have to really, really engage with it. So the rest of us don't have to engage with it at all.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what would happen collectively if we all tried to get ourselves a little more educated and comfortable on end of life and what that looks like. And end of life doesn't just mean the last 5 days, it's the last however many years.
Right.
And these people are still people, these people are still alive. They still feel and see and do. And, how do we honor that? How do we honor that better as a culture? That's a challenge that we're going to have to rise to. Yeah. Because our boomers are aging and we're about to have more people in need of care than we do caregivers. And so we're going to have to come up with something. And I guess to me, that always starts with conversation and it always starts with a story. So, these are some pretty sad stories of individuals who fell through the cracks or who didn't have anyone. We have to do better.
Yeah, I think not to make the process of death, the process of grieving into like a technical thing, but kind of what you're getting at is that you have to get educated. You have to learn. Skill is probably not the right word, but like you have to learn how to grieve, learn how to deal with these processes, these painful processes that are inevitable. And I think there are ways to learn. There are conversations to be had, stories to be told that can teach us how better to handle this. So that instead of saying, I'm not equipped to handle this grief, I'm not equipped to walk into this pain right now, so I'm going to walk the other direction, to say, okay, maybe I have some tools in my tool belt that make me feel like I can take a step forward, that I can lean into this pain. Because You're like,
Absolutely.
oh, it's sad to look at this. I'm going to walk away. It's sadder to walk away, I think,
I think ultimately long term, I mean, more pain, and not just pain for yourself, but pain for other
Yeah.
people. And if, collectively as a society, we all decide to do that, that's not a pretty sight. That is not a pretty sight. And we're all going to be there someday too. It can feel far away sometimes, like, oh gosh, that's, decades from now. I don't have to worry about that. Well, if we don't change the culture, we are going to have to worry about that. And you're right. There are so many tools for grief support. There are so many tools for preemptively planning what you want that death to look like. There are so many options and things available for what death planning looks like, so that you can take control. You can say, this is who I want to see. This is what music I want to be playing. These are my favorite smells. This is what I want to happen afterwards. This is what I want read to me. This is who I want there. This is what I want people to know about me. And you can start to take control of it a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just go, yeah, no, I'm just going to kick that into the long grass for as long as possible, it looks a little different. Thank you for allowing a platform to have this conversation, because I know it's a unique one and a different one maybe than you've had before. But I think death is as important to a story as many other aspects.
Absolutely.
It's still part of it.
I think I'm all about getting back to seeing people's humanity. And death is just a non-negotiable part of that. It is the most deeply human thing. And so how can you, really look at people and see them for their humanness without talking about that, I think. And I think it is even coming into this conversation for me, I was putting myself in a very much I'm just kind of here to learn and ask questions, because I also don't know how to have those conversations. Not equipped for that.
And I really wouldn't have known either if I hadn't just kind of found myself in this position, right? And this job. It wasn't something I sought out, but I feel lucky to have been around people who know what they're doing, and then I can absorb that. And then I could bring that to my own family when the time came. So I think, I would just encourage people to at least be open-minded and exploring what that looks like, and asking questions, and just put your toe in the water if you're not totally comfortable. But you're right, it's a non-negotiable. It's going to happen to all of us. And I'd rather kind of know what to expect and feel like I have a little bit of, you wouldn't, when you're about to have a baby, you do a little background, you kind of read, you get a couple pamphlets at the hospital, you kind of learn what's up, how often do I feed this little person, and how often I would say, we should be doing the same thing when it comes time for death too.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be scary. That's a taboo that needs to go away, because it can be beautiful. It can be very honoring and peaceful and sacred when someone passes away. And it's a privilege to be a part of that. So
absolutely.
It doesn't have to be scary. It can be sad. It probably will be sad.
Yeah, that's not.
But sad doesn't have to be
thing.
Scary. Yeah.
Well, I wonder if you could share a little bit about what you've gotten to see in the Abbie Hunt Bryce home, as far as how does creating the space, giving them community, the best words, I was coming up with, thinking of using my imagination to say, what's probably going on in this space is that you're giving people community, you're giving people their dignity, and you are providing them safety. And I wonder if, if people could understand the power of what you're doing there, if that might help them be able to lean into these conversations more. So I guess that was a long way to say my question is, why does that matter? What have you seen? What changes have you seen? What power have you seen that have?
Support is everything. I never ever say that we cure anyone, but we've actually had individuals come in on hospice, right? They've had a terminal diagnosis. They've chosen to no longer seek, treatment, which is really what hospice is. It's just deciding, I would rather just be comfortable than continue chemotherapy, or I would rather just be comfortable than continue surgery after surgery. I just want to accept my diagnosis. I don't know how much time I have left, but I'd rather not spend it, in the hospital. And that's just a decision that some people choose to make, right? And so it's about those comfort measures. So you have individuals who are terminal and might be 90 pounds when they come to us. And then through some stability, through some love, through being able to count on some food and bathe on a regular basis and have a warm bed to sleep in, we've had people graduate off of hospice.
Wow.
That just, of course, there's the conversation about, health and how, certain things can contribute to the quality of life and your health factors. Right. And so we've had people actually leave the home and they're no longer dying, and then we can help find placement for them. Yeah. That doesn't always happen. And like I said, we don't cure people. That's not really the goal, but it's just proof that some stability can really have an effect on someone's physical state. Right. But we've also had people, like I said, come to us at 90 pounds. And when it does come time for them to pass, they've gained like 50 pounds of love. Right. Because we really don't have special diets. It's like whatever you want to eat, you eat that. If you want chocolate cake every day, like we're not trying to, it's no longer about health, right? It's just about enjoyment. And so we spoil them. We cook, to what they like to eat and try to understand what it is that they like to have around. So people can gain weight. And, I've mentioned Richard a couple of times, and I think he's just someone who stood out to me a lot because he was one of the first people that I really connected with. And we have bricks at the home. So each year we have a brick dedication ceremony, and we have bricks that have their name, inscribed on the brick. And then we dedicate it into our brick garden. Wow. And he came up to me and he was like, what do I have to do to get a brick out back? And I said, Richard, you already did it. You're here. Mm-hmm. You've earned a brick. And, a tear rolled down his cheek. And he was like, that's the only place that my name is going to be after I die. And I said, but it'll be there, forever. And so it meant so much to him to just know that somebody was going to capture the fact that he existed. And so, I think when people are starting to decline, right, or when they're starting to enter those final phases of life, their brain really does start to go to, okay, what did I do here? Mm-hmm. What did this all mean? Will I be remembered? Did I really matter? And so doing that for people at the Abbie Hunt Bryce Home, and hopefully encouraging other people to lean into honoring elders and just letting them talk and, asking them questions. And if they're telling you the same story for the 10th time, listen, because it means something to them and they don't have much longer to tell it. Yeah. And, it's, again, I think it's trying to honor someone's humanity as much as possible. And whether that looks like comfort food or whether that looks like a brick in the back, just telling somebody that somebody cares. Again, if we're not on this planet to enjoy our lives, and then if we're not on this planet to help other people feel seen and validated and enjoy their life, then I just really don't know what the point is. Yeah. It's like, what's the point beyond that? You'd be hard pressed to find one, I would say. But yeah, it's just about humanity, really. It's just about validating humanity. Yeah.
I've already, hinted at this a little bit, that the kind of language that I would use is that we all live in social worlds, just kind of understanding, the relationships we exist in, the communities we exist in. It is a social world, and we have some power to, create the kind of social world we want. And I think I see that on a large scale of like the social world of our literal world, of our country, of our state, community. Mm-hmm. And then you also have the social world of your family. You also have your own kind of social world at somewhere like the Abbie Hunt Bryce Home, and it seems like everything you've talked about today is really pointing at some ways that you are intentional about the kind of social world you're creating, of creating a social world that has dignity, that has room for everyone's stories, that helps people to feel remembered, that they have some kind of legacy, whether it's just a brick or, living on through whatever stories or relationships you're forming. And I just think that's a really beautiful thing. I think that's Thank you. Incredible. And like you said, you're one of very few homes like this. And so this is not necessarily a social world that's happening everywhere, that a lot of people are getting to experience.
Right. And, my hope would be that those elements of, honoring someone's individuality and those elements of telling people that they're special and they mattered and just spoiling them, I hope those elements are happening beyond the Abbie Hunt Bryce Home, in other families or nursing homes, I hope that we can do better collectively, but certainly, especially for our population, there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of telling people that they matter. And my hope too is that it doesn't have to wait until they're dying to do so.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. There's this conversation out there about, living funerals. And I know that's kind of weird, but I find it interesting that we kind of wait until someone's passed away to send all these flowers and say all these nice things and get up and reminisce and celebrate them. But what would happen if we started to do that for people before they died? What would happen if we started to do that for people, earlier on?
Wow.
Why do we have to wait until something like that happens?
Mm-hmm.
And so again, like it shouldn't take death to start honoring somebody. It shouldn't take, their life is almost over. I better kind of get my words of encouragement in there, So trying to kind of run that back and start that earlier in the process.
Yeah. Well, this conversation has been so incredible and insightful and meaningful to me. And I think for the people that will listen to this, I'm sure they'll be able to find some meaning in it, whatever it is speaking into their lives.
I hope so.
Yeah. The questions I just want to end on is one that I ask everybody. And I think for us will kind of just be a summary of many things that we've already talked about. But in your own words, how would you define a better social world?
I think a better social world looks like giving everyone resources and support and encouragement to really, fan their own unique gifts and their own unique perspectives, because each one of us has something to offer. Every single one of us has something we're good at. Every single one of us has something to say. And so creating more space for people to be able to just be themselves and, showcase their talents and do so without judgment, and showcase their opinions and do so without judgment, even if you don't agree with them. Not everyone is going to be the same. And that's kind of what makes a social world work, right? Like if we all look identical, that becomes a little scary.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess to me, giving people the permission to be authentic, to who they are, whatever that looks like, as long as you're not hurting somebody else, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life.
Yeah.
And not only will I not judge that, but I hope to celebrate it. That's my own words on that.
That's great. Yeah. Better social world includes more celebration for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Okay. And I guess I lied saying that was my last question, because really, what I want to end on with you is us, being creative, hopefully, and trying to come up with something that people that are listening and you and I even could leave this conversation with. And the language that I would use in the podcast is calling that a next turn, because that's a helpful way to look at the episodes that we're in of our interactions with people of our life happen in turns. Even our conversation now, you said something, so I said something back, and then you responded the way you did, so I responded. Those were turns back and forth. We both, again, created something new as we took turns. And then this podcast conversation is one turn. And so what's the turn we want to take next? So I wonder if we could come up with a good next turn. And for me, I'm thinking part of that is encouraging people to learn more about, how to grieve, how to be in those really hard spaces at the end of life with people that they love. And maybe even, learning more about even specifically what you do at Morning Light and even some of those other organizations that do the similar things that you do.
Yeah, a great next turn would be to go to morninglightinc.org
Yep.
and support us. No, I'm just kidding.
No, that's good.
Shameless plug there.
Yep.
No, really though. I would say a good next turn is being intentional about embracing all elements of humanity. And that's the good and the bad. That's the hard, and the fun. That's the highs and the lows. And, which parts of humanity do I tend to shy away from? Do I tend to avoid? Why am I doing that? How can I lean into those things more so that I am experiencing life in all its elements and with all that it has to offer? And I think also staying curious and asking questions about people who look different from you or sound different from you or seem different from you. And, doing your best to explore other different kinds of backgrounds, because you may find that somebody else's perspective actually aligns pretty well with your own and you didn't even realize it. And then, being able to find a little bit more about yourself through listening to somebody else's story, and honor those differences that may arise, and don't submit to other people thinking that your differences aren't unique or beautiful, because they are. That's loaded, but there's a couple next turns to take.
Yeah. I think that's good. That's good. And I think if people took, even one of those things as a next turn.
Yeah. Sorry, that was 5 next turns.
No, that was great. That's great. If people took one or all 5 of the next turns, I see, that obviously would affect the turn after that and the turn after that. And it feels like this as a next turn is a small step towards the kind of better social world that we've already talked about throughout this whole conversation. That it's
I would hope so.
Those small things that really turn into these big things can create the better social world for us.
Completely.
Well, thanks, Madison.
Well, thanks for having me. This has been fun. This has been really good.
Sadly, that is all for our conversation with Madison, but even as our conversation ends, still be thinking about those next turns and what feels right for you to keep this conversation going on in your life. One of those things could be checking out Madison's poetry book, Dear Mir. I really enjoyed reading it, and if poetry is something you like or something you're trying to get into, I think it's a really great one to check out. Another thing that you could do is to support Morning Light in any number of ways, or even learning more about the organizations that help with end-of-life care near you. Clearly, it's a conversation that I think we could definitely be a part of bringing to the forefront in our societies. A couple things I want to ask of you today. 1, share this episode or any of your favorites with someone who you want to invite in. I'm really excited about the growth of this podcast. As I'm recording this, I can see that we are just 4 listens shy of 3,000 total listens for the show. So I'd love to see that keep growing and just invite more and more people into dialogue with us. 2, please follow, rate, and review the show wherever you listen. It means a lot to me if you can express what the podcast means to you in the form of ratings and reviews. 3, please follow me on Instagram at Stories Live, Stories Told Pod. Check out the website. On there, you can connect more directly with any of the people that we've had on if you're curious about the other work that they do or learning more or connecting with them. You can find that at the guest page on the website. 4, check out the stuff I'm posting on YouTube, which includes some additional educational content that I think could be great for students and teachers. And last but not least, please reach out. I want to be in conversation with you, so feel free to DM me on Instagram, comment on YouTube, email me, or use the contact page on the website. I'm always happy to hear from you. As always, I get to do this podcast with support from the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. We share the same goals of reflecting on our communication, learning the power of storytelling, and working to make better social worlds. You can read about them on my website under the CMM Institute page, and also check out their website to see what else they have going on that you might want to be a part of. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious. And thank you for being a part of this story. Keep creating mindful moments, and until next time, I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.